to stronger data conclusion, sorry to talk over that, where we're going to be thinking about sort of not necessarily introducing common patterns, but once we have some data visualizations, how are we helping our students engage with them in slightly different ways? If we're building from last month where we were talking about those common patterns, how do we then step forward and help our students dive a little bit deeper? Okay, they see the pattern, now what? How do we help them with those conclusions and those different pieces? And this is all part of the fact that we're constantly bombarded and thrown different visualizations. These are two visualizations that I just pulled today. Like this one, Statista literally came out with today, December 2nd, but they're all over the place. And the easier it has gotten for data visualizations to get out into the world, for all of us to be able to make them, to include them in our news posts, in our social media feeds, in our infographics, in our curricular materials. We're seeing lots and lots and lots of visualizations coming up, but in science and social studies, the purpose, the intention of looking at data is for the purpose of making meaning of it, of understanding, so what can we say, or what other questions can we ask based off of those data and what we're seeing in those visualizations, which means we need to get to that conclusion of, okay, so what can we say, or maybe what do we still have questions about what we are saying from those visualizations? And there are a wide variety of visualizations or data sets that we are working with, but just to sort of center us in that reality of there's a lot of data out there. It is very much in our standards to help our students make sense of said lots of data out there. But how do we help them sort of work with and make sense of and be able to draw conclusions from those data? So when we're reading prose, it's a bit different than when we're working with data. And so I just kind of want to help us or sort of situate us in this difference of when we're reading our prose and we're going through, we read the written context after we've learned how to read, right? And this is a big transition in upper elementary school when we go from learning to read to learning through reading, or learning to read versus reading to learn. And so once we're in that reading to learn phase of our lives, late elementary and beyond, we read the prose. We can pull out and identify different claims or conclusions that the author is making. And then we can connect it to the content either from us thinking about what's off the page and how that relates to what we are learning, or even within the page, we can see sort of some of the supporting sentences or pieces of lines of evidence that were shared to support those topic sentences or the claims or the thesis that is being put forward in the prose as it is being presented. So when we're reading prose, it's a pretty linear process of we read it, we can identify the different claims through it or the thesis of it, and then we connect it to the content. But it is different when we are working with data. But I jumped ahead. This is the way a lot of our data interactions go for our students in the classroom in terms of different lessons that are getting developed and curricular materials and activities, or in essence, what we're sort of trying to ask our students to do is, okay, well, let's give them some data or the visuals of the data that we're working with, and we're going to ask them to look at it the same way we read prose and identify a claim or a conclusion from there, and then connect that to the content that we're working with or that we are learning. But I jumped the gun because it's not actually this linear process when we're working with data. It's this intersection of these three components: the content, the visuals, and the data. And those three come together. We need to bring those intersections of those three pieces together to actually help our students identify a claim or draw a conclusion from the data that they are working with. So that's the piece here in the center, that what I'm just sort of using the CER acronym for, because it's smaller and it's easier to fit in that tiny little space. But that that conclusion, what we're after, that purpose of, so what can we say from these data, from this visualization that we are looking at? Now, the orange and yellow pieces here is, this is cognitively what we are working on and what we are doing as we move and interface between these three different components, the content, the visuals, and the data pieces. And so what we're going to think about are, so, okay, so what are some of those strategies that we can use to help our students with those different pieces, those different connectors, if this is cognitively what we need to be doing to set ourselves up for success or to set our students up for success when it comes to making a conclusion from our data. What are some strategies we can use to help our students do that or to get at that a little bit differently as we go forward? Okay, so before we jump in too far, I want to pause for those of you that are here live to think about what are some common struggles that your students have with making claims from data or drawing conclusions from data? So that's question number one. Question number two is, and what questions do you have about how you're helping your students, right? You selected to come to this talk where we can work together and explore some strategies on how to help students with those. So I am making the assumption that either you are having some struggles with your students doing that, or you have some questions on how you can help your students do that better. So would love to hear from you. So I'm going to give about a minute and a half or so. You can put it down in the Zoom chat. Number one, what are some common struggles that you've seen with your students, maybe this year or in years past? And two, what are some questions you have about how to help your students through those struggles or things that you're seeing with your students? Okay, so you can put it in the chat, or if you want and you're here live, you can put it also in the Google document, whichever works best for you. And we'll come back in about a minute. Fantastic. Not fantastic, we're having struggles and that we have questions, but great to sort of think about what they are and what we're seeing in our students and different things that we're witnessing with our students as it comes to them making conclusions, drawing conclusions, making claims from the data. So we've got kind of students who only focus on reading, not interpreting the graphs, and what is the difference between those two, and how we help them realize that just reading is different than that interpreting piece, and that synthesizing piece is really where we need to get them to when they are drawing conclusions from their data, and also trying to help them think of like those other meta components when they're working with a data set or a visualization. Like, who made the visualization, right? I showed us some Statista visualizations earlier, but who made it? Why did they make it? What is it for? Who is that graph 4, all of those great questions that help our students build out that sort of broader critical understanding of the visualizations, and also some really key parts of it is not a computer. This is where I want to pause, be like, and yes, AI can now spit out some data visualizations for us. And yet it is trained off of things that people created initially, and how the algorithm was originally written in for how AI works with those spaces, again, was by humans. Humans are making the decisions. And so this is a key part of sort of how do we help our students realize that they are active drivers in this, working with, making sense of, thinking about the visualizations, the data visualizations or data sets that they are working with. And those are key components, key aspects of helping them sort of get through some of these struggles. We are going to talk about some others, but before we get there, I have 2 more questions for us. So if you are using the CER framework, or if you are having your students draw conclusions from data, if you're not actually using CER, I have 2 questions for you. Okay, so first question, are you currently using it to have your students confirm or assess information that they've already learned? Like, you can assess their learning, or they are demonstrating what they've already learned. That's A. Or B, are you using CERs or having students draw conclusions from data to as they are making sense or discovering information as they are working through it? So the first is sort of, A is kind of, okay, we're confirming what have they learned, and B is more, we're like in the messy middle of making sense of things. A or B or both. Maybe you're using them for both. A or B. What are we using our CERs for currently? And you can just put it in the chat or put it in the Google document, whichever you would prefer, whichever is easier. A or B or both. Okay, great. One more question for you. As you are using CERs or working with having your students make sense of visualizations, are they, one, is it part of their arguing from evidence, so they're trying to put together an argument, or 2, they are constructing an explanation from the data? It's all about data here tonight. So like, are we arguing from evidence with our data, or are we constructing an explanation from the data as our students are putting together the CR? And again, maybe it's both. Maybe it's 1 and 2. How are we currently using CERs in our classrooms? Okay. So there's a variety of different ways we can use our CERs, how we can help our students draw conclusions from data, a variety of different ways that we're currently doing it in our classroom. But let's jump into some strategies. So thank you for answering those questions. That helps sort of me get a sense of where we're at and what we're seeing with our students, as well as hopefully get a sense of like, it's not just you, students are struggling with these things all around. But let's dive into some strategies. And so first we're going to think about, how can we help our students see the evidence better? So as in, okay, they're reading the visualization, that's great, but how can we help them pull out key components or get to that more critical thinking of like, who made this, or what is it made for, or what is here and what is not here? And we're going to look at some lynx and snowshoe hare data. These are, I pulled these from a great data set that is in Tuva. Actually, both of the visualizations that we're going to be looking at tonight are from Tuva. Tuva is a fantastic online graphing resource. I am not here to pitch you or sell you on Tuva. It is great if you're using CodeApp, that's great. If you're using Data Classroom, that is great. If you're using Desmos, let's talk about it. all of these different ways that we can do some interactive graphing. But this particular one, the two today, particularly come from Tuva. And this data set is about lynx and snowshoe hare in Canada. It's old data. It's from the Hudson Bay Company, and it's historical fur return record. So hunters would go out and they would hunt the animals and they would return the pelts, the furs in to get paid for their work. And so then people could make coats and blankets and clothing and all of the different things out of it. And yes, we now live in a very different time. But so these records go from the early 1800s to the mid 1930s. And they're documenting the yearly numbers of Canadian lynx and snowshoe hare pelts that were sort of brought in by trappers. So as some context for there. Now let me give you, I'm going to sort of showcase the data. So here is a plot of the data. We're looking at years. So from those late 1800s to the 1930s, these are the data that we have. The purple circles and purple line relates to the lynx count, and that's here on our left y-axis, our vertical y-axis. And then the green line and diamonds represents our hare count. So the number of pelts that were returned to that the Hudson Bay Company recorded being turned in by trappers across the different years. So we've got a year total for each year as they are going through. So these are the data that we have that we are going to be looking at. But the strategy that I'm going to ask us to think about and consider is, what is something that we can say from these data? And what is something that we cannot say from these data as it relates to, let's say, changes in lynx or hare over time in Canada? Okay, so we're looking at changes over time of lynx and or hare from Canada. These are the time periods that we have. And we're going to pause so that everybody has some time to look at it. It might be kind of small on your screen. So I also put the visualization in our shared resource document. So let me just showcase that. So we're here on page 2. What can we say? What can we not say? And here's the visualization, and I will even make it a little bit bigger for us here in the Google document. So if that, oh, it dropped down to the next page. So if that's easier than looking on the screen, you can look here. But let's think about what's something, at least one thing that we can say, and at least one thing we cannot say from these data. Let's take about 2-3 minutes to sort of look at the visualization and come up with some ideas of things we can say and cannot. Great. Let's take about 30 seconds, wrap up the thought that we are noodling on, and then we'll come back together and talk about this can and cannot say, why I was asking us this question. Okay. Excellent. So oftentimes when our students are reading graphs or sort of initially jumping into a graph, we ask them for what can they say? This makes more sense, right? We're trying to get them to a conclusion that relates to our learning content areas, our learning objectives that we have for our students. But what's interesting is actually using this strategy of having students look at a visualization and think about, okay, what is something I could say? And what's something I cannot say? Does a couple different things. There's a couple different components of it that can be helpful for our learners as they are going through. It draws us into this analyze step of cognitive step of when we're pulling together the content, the visuals, and the data, because it gets us thinking about sort of what are the data showing me? Yes, and this is typically what we ask for our students of like, okay, so what are the data showing? In fact, oftentimes we're sort of asking more of these interpretation questions, but that's okay, we'll get there. But sort of this, what are the data showing me? Some things that students can talk about that they can say from the data are like, what are the ranges of the data? How do the variables change? We were calling out like that the PELT numbers had fluctuated over time as it relates to our question. This pattern also was coming through as we were thinking about those PELT numbers fluctuating. And so thinking about, okay, well, what can I say is sort of helping us dig a little bit more deeply, giving us a different way into answering some of these analysis questions. We're really trying to get our students to pause, the thing that is so hard for our students these days, to pause and actually look at what is on the page. Not necessarily only what the variables are, the axes are, because that in and of itself can be a tricky thing. That is more the engage or sort of the orientation to it. But then what are the actual data values that we are working with? And by creating a situation where our students are thinking about, well, what can they say and what can they not say, it encourages our students to, it encourages our students to look a little bit deeper, to do that pause a little bit harder. And so, wait, let me go back. I'm not trying to make you dizzy. When we are thinking about, okay, but what can't we say from these data, then that helps us think about a little bit like, okay, maybe not who made the graph, but maybe why would we want to, like, why would the Hudson Bay Company want to record these data? Who collected the data? Why would we be interested in looking at it? Now, those of us that teach biology might look at this and be like, oh yeah, we could totally use this to look at predator preys and fluctuations over time between a predator and a prey species. But that's probably not why the Hudson Bay Company originally collected these data in the 1800s. They were probably looking at it from a business standpoint of what were the numbers coming in and how they could think about that and think about it going forward and how much money went out the door to pay the trappers, et cetera, et cetera. But that has an impact on potentially how they were recording the data or which pieces of data they recorded. And so helping our students kind of with these other questions of what can I say, what can I not say, it helps them think more critically about the data that they are working with. And for those of us that are experts working with data, and all of us are as adults, because we've been doing it for years now, and we've really built up the mental models of how to do it, we skip this step. So we engage and orient with the visualization like I did when I was like, okay, what are we looking at? And what are on the axes? And what are the different colors of the legends? We do that. And then we pretty much like instantaneously skip over to interpret. So what does it mean? And what can we say? And all of those types of things. Because we're so in the habit of doing this analysis step of looking at the data values on the page and thinking about, okay, so what does it mean? And how do the variables change? And what is the pattern? Things like that, that we kind of skip straight through this. That is not the case for our novices, and helping them pause and think about at this step before we get to, okay, so therefore, what does it mean that our hare and our lynx populations are fluctuating? And what might that help us think about or interpret or understand about hare and lynx populations? So when you're thinking about bringing this to your students, you can encourage them to actively annotate on the graph, always so fantastic to be drawing on it. We talked about that last month about how it really helps students think about the patterns. They can be drawing arrows and then circling and all these different things just to provide visual cues, make their thinking visible for us. You can talk through an example with them in terms of things they can or cannot say to kind of lay the foundation depending on the age of our learners, right? They're actually, regardless of the age, we always want to caveat that it's like, we're not saying that, yes, you can't say anything about Pokemon from this data visualization about hares and lynx from the Hudson Bay Company, right? It has to be somewhat content related, like within the boundary. And so role modeling that can be really helpful. Sometimes for students, it can be hard. For some of our students, it can be hard to think about what they can say. For others of our students, it can be hard to think about what they cannot say, especially those that are really good at looking for the right answer and trying to sort of get through and get done and do school well. That what can't we say might be a little unnerving for them. And so role modeling this can be a helpful entryway or an invitation into the strategy. And then what's great about this is that as long as it's related to the content, it can provide great opportunities to have discussions about the variety of different responses that you can get back from your students, especially the cannot say. There's probably likely going to be a lot of variability or variety in terms of what students are saying. And that can create a richer conversation and a richer discussion of, so what are the data that we are looking at? This is a way to sort of role model and start building up that muscle memory and the practice of, we should think about, like, not just take it all at face value because it's arrived here in my class as part of my learning experience, but who made the graph and where did the data come from and why was the graph made and things like that. This is a way to kind of build in those opportunities to say, we look deeper than just taking it at face value for the ink on the page. This is super helpful for our students in terms of their critical thinking skills, they're making sense of our content areas, hitting our learning objectives, building those sort of mindsets for how our students work, and fundamentally critical for when they are looking at being exposed to visualizations on their social media feeds and through the news and different things like that. And so it's a both and. It hits our content learning objectives in school, and it is a super important skill set to have in the 21st century as these data visualizations have proliferated going forward. So this can or cannot say can be used both when we are using our CERs or having students draw conclusions from data when they're making an argument from the evidence. The evidence in this kind of case would be experience, logic, principles, or the data that supports the idea. And we can also use it when we're constructing an explanation with our CER or with our conclusion, in which we're really leaning into the data that is relevant to the particular phenomenon. Now, have we gotten there by just looking through this, doing this one activity of can and cannot say? No, but we are inviting them to go a bit deeper into what is on the page and seeing those components on the page, which then helps set them up for more success to think about, oh, well, what could be relevant or important or interesting in terms of the claim that I am going to make going forward. Okay, so that's one strategy. Practice pulling evidence from the data. Practice thinking about like what's actually there. What is a piece of evidence that I can see? And then what can I not say that also helps put boundaries around their claims that they make so they don't make wildly large claims that are not actually related to the visualization. But let's keep moving on and thinking about sort of if that's a strategy for helping our students kind of step into or see better what's going on the page when they're reading that visualization, sort of inviting them in to pause and down deeper into what's on the page. Let's think about, so how can we help them build confidence in making the claims? Like the whole point of why we're here, Kristen, is right to like think about helping our students make those conclusions. So for this strategy, we're going to shift out of links and hair. We're going to look at some roller coaster data. So these are data from 408 roller coasters around the world that opened between 1924 and 2015. And as a human who lives in a town with a really, really old wooden roller coaster, it is always really fun to play with this data set. So these are what the data look like. So we have the height of the roller coasters of these, what did I say, 408 roller coasters, and the speed of those roller coasters. And we have some of the roller coasters in the data set are wooden, and some of the roller coasters in the data set are steel. So with these data, what we're going to do is we're going to do a strategy called support or refute. The way this works is I'm providing you 4 claims that students have made from the visualization. And just want you to sort of read through what these students' claims are from the data visualization and think about how you could use this visualization, which again is in the shared resource document, how you could use that visualization to like evidence for patterns you're seeing in this visualization to either support one of these claims, a claim that one of these students is making, and how come evidence in this visualization refutes some of these other claims that the students are making. So what we've got here, it's in the shared resource document. Let me just orient you to where it is. We're here at the bottom of page 3, where we have the 4 different claims that the students made from this visualization, and the visualization has popped over here onto the top of page 4. So using this visualization and the patterns and evidence within it, which of these would be supported and which would be refuted by the visualization. And you can just, let's say you want to say Anne is supported because I am just randomly typing in words here. You can just add it straight into the Google document as you're reading through their comments and then thinking about that. How does this representation, the patterns that we're seeing in it, the evidence within that visualization support one of these students' claims and refute the others? So let's take about 2-3 minutes and then we'll come back together. Okay, fantastic. So thinking about these four different student prompts and the claims that the different students were making, right? So Megan, as the height increased, as the drop height increased, the roller coaster top speed increased, right? That's another way to articulate this positive relationship that we're seeing within these data. And so we could, point towards the fact that this is actually the reality of the data values is like as the height increased, the speed increased overall for the roller coasters. Is it exactly perfect line step? No. Reality. These are actual real roller coasters. The one that often gets that is a little bit of tricky is Sol, with the kinetic energy is greatest for steel roller coasters. This might help us think about or reason about why these three or seven, however many we want to how we want to call it, roller coasters up here of those with the greatest heights and the greatest speeds are steel within this roller coaster. But we don't have any information in this visualization. There's no evidence in this visualization that relates to kinetic energy. That is us using our understanding, or Saul using their understanding of kinetic energy and potential energy, which is fantastic, but is reasoning, not the claim. Now, we're not here to talk about roller coasters or all of those things, but instead thinking about this as a strategy we can use for our students to help them think about how to write better claims. It is far easier for us to critique others than to do it ourselves, or us to correct others than to do it ourselves. And it's in fact a great way to help our students learn those skills and build those skills out over time. And so if you're doing this with your students, providing them different opportunities to look at, yep, it jumped ahead, to sort of look at the claims of others. So you can provide, but there are a variety of ways you can do it. You can do it the way we just did it, which is basically here, number 2, where you provide 2 or 3 claims, or I provided you 4 claims. And where the way I did it, I provided 4 claims, 1 was well supported, and then the other 3 were not supported. You could instead provide 2 to 3 claims where each is slightly but not entirely supported with the visualization, and ask students to refine the claim. You could even jigsaw it if if you're giving them more than one claim and having them do this. You could provide the graph or the visualization, the data set, and a claim, and then ask the students to determine how the data supports or refutes that particular claim. You could provide them the visualization or the data set and a claim that the data refutes, and then have the students identify that the claim is not actually supported by the data, and then refine the provided claim by what is supported in the data. Now, certainly don't need to do these all the time, but these are different ways to help build that muscle of how do we make good claims or good conclusions from the data. And for our novices who are still learning how to do this interpretation step, let me see if I can actually get it to the slide. Nope, it's not wanting to let me show the slide. Here it is. Thinking about, how do we interpret it? What does the pattern mean? How could that be? As we're getting to that purpose, that intentionality of why we're looking at the data and connecting it back to the content, it can be helpful to sprinkle in these other ways of our students working with the conclusions. Now, absolutely, we want to give them opportunities as well to look at data and form their own conclusions. But as we're kind of building up that strength, we want to practice that from different ways. So this is like why my arms are so sore right now, because I did an arms and shoulder, routine yesterday where I was doing bicep curls and I was doing tricep dips, and oh my gosh, even just like going through this hurts my arms. And I did like over the head carries, right? These are all different ways to strengthen my arms. It's the exact same way with our students and their brains, and helping them build out these skills of working with and getting ready and better at drawing conclusions, interpreting the data that they are working with. So using this support and refute, and there's a variety of different ways that you can use it, can be a way to help build that muscle memory, build that muscle for our students on how to practice that. And again, it's exactly the same. Like we can use this strategy whether we're using CRs to make an argument from evidence or whether we are using our CRs to construct an explanation. So regardless of what the claim is that we're after, we can use this strategy. Now, okay, we got a few minutes left. A couple things about reasoning. There are a couple different, I don't know about you, my students really struggled with reasoning, and this is probably one of the biggest things that we hear when we are in schools across the country is like they can't, the two biggest things that we hear are one, what came up earlier in terms of like they're reading it, they're not interpreting it. And then the second piece is they can interpret it, but then they struggle with the how to actually reason about the visualization that they are working with. So what can we do about the reasoning? How can we help our students with the reasoning? Well, a couple ideas that I want to share out with you. So we can help them by giving them sort of strategic responses to thinking about how their reasoning could be better. For example, we could encourage them to do a better job sort of with that justification that links the evidence to the claim. So let's think about this as it relates to the roller coaster data set. The positive relationship between the drop height and the top speed, that's what we were talking about, means that roller coasters with a higher drop height reach a higher top speed. Now, that is helping them sort of link what they've seen, the evidence of that positive relationship to what it could mean, right? This like, it means that connection there. What does that pattern mean? That's a key component in interpretation that we need to come in our reasoning. Or we could give our students feedback or examples or help push them towards really making sure they have that logical connection between the evidence and the claim. So the drop height must give the roller coaster more energy so that it goes faster on the tracks, right? Now we're sort of thinking about like, why could that be? How could that happen? So roller coasters with higher drop speeds can reach higher top speeds, right? We're getting them thinking about that mechanism, those components of how it could possibly happen. And then this is stepping them in or sort of breadcrumbing or building up their ability in order to refer to scientific principles. One, they're explaining that link between evidence and claim. So this is like, right, this is where we want to be going. This is what we want to be seeing in the reasoning of all our students. So we're learning, here it is, about kinetic and potential energy. So now I think that drop height is related to potential energy and speed is related to kinetic energy. So roller coasters with higher drop heights have more potential energy, which converts into kinetic energy and thus higher top speeds. So we're getting those logical connections, how it could be, what is the mechanism, and how it relates to our scientific principles that we are working towards. Now, we have looked at two kinds of visualizations that are very science-focused or that could be used in a very science-focused way, but they absolutely, these strategies and these components fully work within our social study settings as well. But the point is, right, in those two disciplines is really when we're trying to get our students to draw these conclusions and connect it to our content learning objectives that we have as well. So similarly with the other strategies, these sort of scaffolding or sort of sequencing out what we're asking for from our students or the feedback we're giving to our students as they are working to get stronger on their reasoning works whether we are arguing from evidence or we are constructing an explanation with the data. So 3 strategies this month or this year or next year that you can try with your students. Have them practice pulling evidence from the data using the can and cannot say strategy. Support or have students support and refute claims based on the available data. And similarly to why what we cannot say can help them sort of deepen how they look at the data, having them refute claims helps them build that confidence and a stronger ability in developing claims that are supported by evidence. And then providing sort of specific suggestions for how to deepen or broaden their reasoning, and thinking about it sort of in a sequence of how we help move our students along. And together, all of this is helping our students become more capable in terms of identifying a claim or drawing a conclusion from our data that is actually grounded and supported in the evidence, and that they can, if we want, sort of use reasoning to explain why that evidence supports the claim that they're making and how that relates to what we are learning about, that bigger picture off the page. What does it mean that we are going from? So all of this month relates to how do we help our students interpret data to learn something. So as we were talking about earlier, like that difference between reading a visualization, describing what's going on in the pattern, versus interpreting the data. These are in different realms of working with the data. Analyzing and interpreting is smushed together in our science standards, and it's sort of sprinkled throughout our social studies standards. They are cognitively really different things that we are asking our students to do, evidenced by the fact that a lot of us see our students can do one and struggle with the other. It's because they're different things. They require different components to help our students build up the skills in them. Just because we can read a graph doesn't mean we can interpret a graph, types of things. But hopefully these strategies that we've talked through can help your students kind of get to the next level and keep moving forward. Okay, whew, that was a lot that we have covered in almost, the last 45 minutes to an hour. So I want us to pause and sort of spend a little bit of time to think about, okay, so what's a takeaway for you from this discussion? We all work in different situations with our different students and our learners and our subject areas and our grade levels and all of those things. So time to think about kind of for you personally, what is a takeaway from this discussion? Let's take about a minute and a half or so, and then I will say go and we can do the waterfall, and then we'll move on. I just have a couple announcements to say before we wrap up the recording. And then for those of you that are live, I'll stay and answer all the questions, any questions that you have. And so about minute and a half, like what is a takeaway for you from this discussion today? Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Ooh, look at those awesome takeaways that we have of different ways where we can think about support or refute, and thinking of using some of those different options of how to come through the challenge of having our students think about what we can say or ourselves think about what we can't say. It's totally a different way to think about data. Absolutely. I totally understand, but there can be some value in like pushing a different way and using our brain in a different way coming through. Excellent. Love it. Love it. Ooh, thinking about sort of these opportunities, these strategies to push our students more into that interpreting data rather than just reading data. I love it. Okay, so if you are here live joining us, fantastic. Stay on the line because I will answer your questions in just a quick moment. But thinking about sort of how we set our students up for success with drawing conclusions by adjusting how we ask them to practice these skills of what really goes into drawing conclusions, it's higher order thinking for our students that we're asking them to do. And so we need to sort of shake it up a little bit and meet them where they're at and gives them some adjustments for that. Now, that being said, if you are not here live, or if you are here live and you think of more questions, this is my ask to you. Send us your questions between now and next Monday. Yeah, next Monday, December 8th, to this URL, dataspire.tiny.us/ask-us. Send us your questions. I will pull them all together and put them together in our Ask Me Anything that will go live next Tuesday, December 9th at the same time. So 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. So send us your questions. Dataspire.tiny.us/ask-us so that we can get more of your questions answered and so that we can share them more broadly so we all can learn together, right? Rising tide lifts all boats is what I am trying to say. Whew, it's getting to be the end of the day. Okay, with that, thank you so much for all of you that came live. Hold on, I'll answer your questions in just a moment. For those of you watching the recording, thanks for watching it. I hope you gained some great strategies. Everybody, remember, you can always reach out to us either at my email here or always support@dataspire.org. And you can always send your questions to our tiny URL, dataspire.tiny.us/ask-us. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. For those of you in a snow day, enjoy. For those of you that have snow outside, enjoy. For the rest of us who do not, and if you are a snow-loving human like me, enjoy living vicariously through all the great pictures that you're seeing from friends and family. And if you don't love snow, and if you don't live with snow, congratulations. Enjoy the weather that you have. Until next week at our Ask Me Anything, stay curious, keep exploring your data, and send us your questions. Thanks so much. Bye.